Welcome to the Detroit Institute of Arts, Thursdays at the Museum program. I'm Ian Repnicki. I'm a Community Engagement Manager at the DIA. The DIA would like to thank residents of Macomb, Oakland, and Wayne counties for your generous millage support. Due to that support, we are able to provide free general admission for Tri-County residents, free field trips for schools, specialty programming for adults 55 and older, which includes free bus transportation to the museum. Today, if you're watching on YouTube and you'd like to ask a question during the program, just make sure that you're logged in using your Google account. And if you're watching on Facebook, then you can leave a public comment there as well. Today, DIA Studio Coordinator Zach Freeling is joined by artist Michael Polakowski to discuss his artistic practice. So please welcome Michael and Zach. Hey.
Thank you, Ian. Hi, Michael. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
Doing good, Zach. Doing very good. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we're going to look at some of your artwork today. Then you're going to give us a little bit of a demonstration. So let's jump right in. So this slide shows a couple pieces here. I kind of just chose this one to show the scale of your work. Could you give the viewers a bit of a guess of to how large these is, and then also just kind of introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your work?
Yeah, hi everyone. So like Zach said, I'm a local painter and muralist in Detroit. I've had my studio practice here for about going on 6 years now. I am a Michigan native, grew up in Dearborn, and a lot of my work kind of speaks to the local Midwestern kind of sensibilities, aesthetic, and topics and motifs. So these two pieces are kind of really good examples of what my work generally looks like, and the topics that it kind of explores. You have in front of you like a 4 foot tall by 4 foot wide acrylic painting of a backyard pool. And then the smaller painting to the right is a painting of a garage that, again, two really just common things that anyone growing up in the Midwest kind of can relate to, but like a little bit of a twist here and there with some of the more tropical trees that you kind of see. A lot of my work kind of is very localized to the area, but kind of subverts some of that aesthetic by kind of adding surrealist twists on that. So yeah.
Well, that's great. How long would you say you've had kind of this style? Did you start off doing these sort of localized but sort of surreal scenes? Was that something that grew and developed over time? You mentioned the trees and also, yeah, some of the wavy lines, and also the color palette is very, very distinct.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I mean, being an artist, you kind of start with this really broad spectrum. I mean, you have literally anything and everything to kind of explore as content matter, and also through form, and with color, line, and all these ways to express your ideas and different ideas that you can explore. So kind of what we're talking about today, and what I kind of use throughout my work, is using artwork as a lens to kind of go through your life and to kind of explore. So my work kind of developed very organically. I have my undergrad at BFA, where I kind of learned how to make art. But then from that, I just kind of kept, after graduating, I just kept making paintings and producing, and just like never stopping. And at every body of work that I would make, like let's say 12 paintings, 8 paintings, it kind of refined what I was focused on. If I painted 8 paintings for my first solo opening in 2017, I really, from those paintings, they were smaller acrylic paintings. I really liked the still lives and the domestic settings that I was kind of seeing. And then some things kind of fell away. Like I did more illustrative work early on that was really inspired by posters from Poland for movies and stuff like that. And that kind of influence kind of took a back seat as my area of focus really shifted to these domestic scenes that you kind of see, that you're going to see throughout the hour. And my body of work is really inspired by like artists like Bonnard and Vuillard, who who really like painted what was in front of them.
Oh, that's great. I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned, doing a body of work, whether, 8, 10, 12 pieces. Is that something you like for an exhibit? Is that something that you kind of set out to do? I'm going to do 8, or is that just something that kind of comes about organically? Do you ever have things that don't make the cut, or things that you weren't expecting to be part of a body of work? Do you organically change to a new topic or kind of point of view after that what you consider that a body of work?
Yeah. Creating bodies of work it's not all that I do. Sometimes I'll do like a one-off commission for someone. Sure. Sometimes I'll do a mural, like you'll kind of see later on. But creating a body of work is like a really good deep dive and a way to kind of focus and kind of limit yourself for a brief period of time. So this last year I was in a 3-person opening at a gallery in town called Playground Detroit. Really great gallery, great roster of artists that they work with. And so me and 2 other artists, we had an opportunity to kind of fill this space. And it kind of goes without saying, but like it's really important to know that paintings exist within space and they exist on walls. And so we want to fill that space in like a beautiful way, and something that's visually appealing, while also saying like kind of giving ourselves the room to play, and to kind of, so it starts really broad, and then you start off with like, I want to make 8 paintings because that's what fills this gallery, and that's what like kind of gives it room to breathe. Obviously, you don't want to make 10,000 paintings for like a 5 square foot gallery wall. Because every work needs to kind of have this room for the viewer to kind of investigate and sit with it. And then a lot of it goes into like the time frame that you have to work on it. Like this painting that we're seeing, that you're seeing here, is for a gallery I work with in Australia. And this is when I pivoted to working on canvas, and I had never worked on canvas before. And that's just because we needed to roll them, and I needed to send them literally to the other side of the world. And I did a smaller body of work because, again, thinking about shipping costs and thinking about what is the most concise way to tell this very, again, going back to like, I'm really grateful for this opportunity that I had, because I live in the Midwest, and I kind of make work about the Midwest and about my home. And it was like, I was kind of thinking of as like, what is this way in like 4 pieces that I can concisely represent myself to people who probably might never come here and might never explore places that I spend, an infinite amount of time in. And obviously I'm just one perspective, but having that opportunity to kind of to use my voice and to kind of tell my perspective is kind of what I'm thinking about when I'm making that body of work.
Yeah, that's great. I like to, it sounds kind of like you're, needing to be very nimble, adaptive, and relying on some of these external factors where you're not thinking about just what a body of work means to you, but also space of the gallery where you're shipping things to, other factors, and able to kind of adjust as you go. You mentioned this was the first one on canvas. What had you been painting on prior to canvas?
So before this, I was working on wood panel.
Okay. Is that what's kind of in the background here?
Yeah, you can kind of see that's a good photo to use. Wood panel is a very stiff substrate and a stiff surface to work on. So that goes into like just the amount of control that you can have with wood. Excuse me. The amount of control you can have with wood is like just infinite, because it's really not resisting you in any way. Canvas is oftentimes like it's got a little bit of a play to it, and by play I mean when you're painting that surface is moving back and forth. And I use a lot of masking in my work and tape and frisket. And those are just ways to kind of seal off the area that I'm painting. And so with canvas, that gets a little bit looser. And there's just like this looseness that opens up. And so when I started working on canvas, I kind of by default had to get a little bit looser with what I was expecting out of my work. And I've since worked with more local galleries and more galleries in the country. that I don't need to necessarily work on canvas, but I've stuck with it just because canvas really offers something to my work that just, it basically takes away like the infinite possibilities of control and says like, you know, you have to adapt in some way. And that's something that I've kind of invited into my work because it, again, just goes back to what am I trying to do? And what am I trying to say? And weirdly enough, like something that was like, oh, well, I need to send this to Australia. That little bit of a like thing I had to adapt to, because I spent all this time, like, you know, probably over 500 hours on these 4 paintings. I had enough time to really reflect on that material limiting factor. And I was able to kind of come from that and say like, well, this is really helping me in some way. It's opening up my voice to be more reactive.
Yeah, that seems like a really great lesson, you know, being open to trying something different. And then now that's kind of the normal for now anyway.
Yeah. It's just like, it's a lot of like creating work as an artist. You just continuously refine. And I had a really good talk this last weekend with an artist that I was in a group opening with, and they were just talking about how just like every body of work is this way to kind of clean your hands of what you were thinking about, and like being beholden to the consistency of that body of work. And then you can just kind of like pick through, you know? So after I do a body of work, I kind of like take a moment, like a week or so, work on other things, clean up my studio because it gets really messy. And then just kind of say like, what is coming with me to the next body of work? Or oftentimes I'll do a body of work for a gallery, and then I'll pivot and do like a one-off piece for like perhaps like a collector who wants me to do a singular piece for just them. Yeah, so it's not just like I want to make 100 paintings. There's a lot of adaptability along the way.
Yeah. All right, so here we have this one. We saw it being, you know, worked on in process on the easel, and then the finished one. And then it reminded me a lot of, it was nice looking through, you know, spending this time putting this together, all of your slides here, and, you know, spending some time really digging into your website and noticing little repeated motifs or themes, not just in the color palette and the shapes and structure of some of the, you know, the imagery, but also little things like this little Matisse figure on this book that's also on this poster here. Is that something you kind of intentionally do, almost have like little things tied in together? Are these from the same series, or is that just something that comes naturally as you're painting your life and your everyday scenes?
Yeah, that's a good thing to ask. The Matisse motif really came from, if you go back to that first piece, that one, it came back because I was reading a lot about Matisse, right, while I was working on these paintings, and just by reading about them, the books were out. Like I have, you know, easily about a dozen books about Matisse, just because he's an artist that I think I really resonate with his conceptual standing for how he made his work, and also just his life story, because like that's what making art is about. It's like what your theories and your kind of how you conceptualize making paintings or objects, and then also your lived experience. So the Matisse motif that you see in the background and in the book on the second piece kind of came from this piece specifically. I just had like a weird like week where I had a lot of back pain. I like had pulled my back, and I was like trying to like just come up with these paintings and trying to like force myself through and plan out the body of work, because I plan out everything in advance. And I was like, okay, I need to take a moment just to lay down. And I kind of laid on the ground, and then I saw like this doorway, and I was like, wow, like this moment of pause put me in this position to see the light coming in this way. And I wouldn't have viewed this scene like I would have had I not, you know, taken care of myself and really taken that moment of pause. And concurrent, like, I guess alongside that is Matisse pivoted to his
Yeah.
cut paper style later in his life because he just physically couldn't paint anymore. And I just love that idea of an artist being 100% dedicated to what it is they love to do, but also being very understanding of what their physical limitations are. So yeah, the Matisse motif is like really layered, and there's a lot to that, but that's kind of in the briefest way possible, kind of where that comes from.
Yeah, well, that's great.
Yeah, thank you.
And this one, some of the imagery too reminds me a bit of some of, we've got a handful of paintings of his at the DIA, still lives and things with windows and vases and flowers and.
Oh yeah, and also visually, like he did a lot of still lifes, and he was really about his use of color and how color and drawing are like completely 100% connected, and like drawing is the even if you're drawing in completely black and white, you're adding and you're taking away color. And I read that in this really great book on painting called Painting as Model. So that's kind of where this piece comes from. And in that book, they kind of examine Matisse as a model for alongside some abstract expressionists that kind of came along in the 1950s and 60s. So pairing that drawing color way of making art with the abstract expressionists who, at least the ones that I look at, like Frank Stella, really concerned with creating really nice silhouettes in hard edge paintings, meaning when you look at every single object here, at least contained within it, that silhouette is really crisp. And I mean, that just comes from an artist talk or a book I read about Frank Stella and like how he like his way of thinking about and conceptualizing drawing and visual art. So yeah, there's a lot of, but then also like the content just comes from like sitting by a window. You know what I mean? Yeah. There's like all of that can happen and does happen, but then at the end of the day, like it gets kind of funneled into just my life, just like my lived day to day. I like to always have flowers in my house. I like to obviously eat fruit. And just kind of, again, going back to what I was talking about before, noticing what's around me and kind of documenting that. And then you start I'm 6 years into my career now. I've started to notice all these patterns. And so this piece is like, there's another piece later on that you can kind of see this through line. If you keep going. Oh yeah, we talked about this piece as well.
What's the other one with the continued through line?
Go one more. That one.
Okay.
So this piece, again, this is like the second still life that I made for a duo opening in Hamtramck a couple years back. And the motif of the opening was oranges and fruit, and like how fruit is kind of like this monstrous and really prolific motif throughout art history. And this painting is kind of me saying like, okay, well, that is what I guess I connect within art is oranges are so important. But I would never eat an orange. I think they're disgusting fruit.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So there's all this like overlay and interplay between my personal life, my personal preference, and also just it's a lot of it comes back to play. Like I want my work to be, it's really serious, but it's also like incredibly not serious. And there's like this balance between lightness and heaviness, and like being really solemn and serious, and creating artwork that speaks to every other painting in the history of all of art history. But also at the end of the day, like I want to make paintings that make me laugh. And that's where the titles come from a lot.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. Speaking of this balance, going back a few here to like this one, I noticed you've got a lot of this imagery that's the colors you choose are really interesting, and there's this like neon mixed with darkness kind of reminds me of sort of like I don't know, it's kind of science fiction, film noir-y.
Mhm.
But then you usually, not usually maybe, but on at least a handful of these, you've got sort of these wordplay type titles. So this one, it's a tree in a house, which is a very interesting image. And then it's just titled Treehouse. Is this something with these, like, do you come up with like which comes first, the title or the imagery?
Both.
Both.
It's, as you'll kind of see later on, it's just like I think fluidity is really important, but also like creating rules for yourself is also equally important. And that's kind of what making art is, in a broader sense. Like, it's about being really, for me at least, and someone can say something completely different, but for me, it's like developing rules that are really personal. And those rules come from like learning about yourself and how you navigate space and how you navigate like social settings and just life in general. And also like what you'll notice within a day. Like, this treehouse is a painting of a house that I walk by every day on my way to my studio. I park like maybe 3 blocks from my studio every morning. And then I just kind of have this nice little 3-block walk. And so I kind of took a photo of this house. Like, I noticed, like, I took a photo of this house like maybe 10 times over the course of a year. And so this house, even though I don't live there, kind of became the central part of my life. And that's where I kind of you can kind of see there's all these like little, like, it's almost like a really subtle pattern on the house where it's like painted in different colorways. And it was like different styles. And that was a way for me to overlay and to kind of start thinking about like, what is this house like in different lighting schemes and on different days? So it doesn't become just a singular experience of this house. And then it's also reacting to one of my favorite paintings is this Gustav Klimt painting that he has, where he has this house that's with a garden in the foreground and the windows are open. And so I was like just reacting to my love of that painting. I saw it this weekend, weirdly enough. I was in New York and was able to visit it. And so, yeah, just like that painting really meant a lot to me. And that painting, like, through my life, my day-to-day experiences, like I brought me to one conclusion with this painting, and my love of that painting brought me to another. And so it's like reacting. And then by the time I was done with this painting, there was like this tree in the middle. And I was like, treehouse. Like tree houses is normally a house within a tree. And it kind of just became, again, like this way to kind of take away some of the weight of this painting, because like all of the stuff we kind of discussed, like, or the stuff that you can talk about with like homes and houses, it starts to get really serious and really heavy. And the titles of the piece for me is a way for me to kind of redeem myself, and kind of say like, okay, it's not all serious here. Like we can laugh at this, even though like if you were to investigate this piece a little bit more, and I could talk about this piece for an hour, and it's like it could probably get really, really heavy. Sure. The titles and the wordplay is my desire to kind of take away some of that seriousness and to kind of take away that weight.
Yeah. Let's look at a few more. This might not tie into the titles, but this is a figure, and you said this was a self-portrait, which we didn't see a lot of figures in the paintings we looked at so far. Can you say a little bit about this one?
Yeah.
Orange, I noticed.
Yeah, again, similar motif. It just like will show up a million times, and I even painted the painting maybe 2 months ago, and it just keeps coming up and coming up. And this painting is odd for me because I very rarely do figural work within my painting practice. In my mural practice, I do a little bit more figural work. But yeah, figural work, meaning just to kind of simplify, is like just work that has people in it, and has this incredible weight to it because there's this person and there's their personhood, and their identity and what they and kind of everything about them is very loaded, and is very on display, I guess, for lack of a better word. So I like to do figural work very rarely, I'd say. And I do that because a lot of my work is like just about creating this world, is about creating, we kind of were talking about before. And you were asking me if like, are all the paintings in the same world? And like, that's kind of my idea for a lot of this, is like, I want to create with every body of work to refine this world that is kind of concurrent and runs alongside ours, but is very personal to myself and to kind of my viewpoint. And so every now and then I like to insert a person into that to kind of remind people that, again, it is a space that people can exist within. So within my gallery practice, I've probably only painted maybe 10 paintings with people, and I've done, you know, upwards of 100 paintings. And again, it's like just like a periodic way for me to ground, to have a grounding force. And a lot of this also comes from my respect for other artists. And this piece, I think in specific, in particular, I was listening to an interview with one of my favorite artists, Peter Saul. And he was like just talking about how figural work has like all this power behind it, because again, when we see a person, we see a face, and sometimes we see people and we see faces even when there's no face or no person. Our minds just gravitate towards it because we're trained to identify patterns, and we're trained to kind of figure out whether a person is a threat or not, and to kind of break them down and to kind of take in all of the signals that they're giving to you. So yeah, I do a lot of self-portraits, I think, just because that's the most, I guess, personal way for me to relate to that object. And sometimes even when I do a figure, it won't look like me, but it is in some aspect a self-portrait.
Okay, cool. We've got a few more to look at here. This one, I think this is the first one that we've seen with that's been more text-based. Can you speak on that a little bit? It's almost has kind of like a more designy look to it, which I guess a lot of your work, you know, has a lot of flat colors and large fields of color. Do you have a design background at all, or is that something you mingle with at all?
Yeah, a little bit. I think design has always been my strong suit. I think I've always been, even before I like really learned to draw and I learned perspective, like my work from the start was always had like somewhat of an understanding of like, and what is design really? It's like just a way to kind of interpret what you see, to and then to like kind of rearrange it on, in this instance, a 2D plane, like on a panel. So yeah, I think text kind of works its way into my work a lot of times. This is like probably the most prominent way. And sometimes like you can't really see it in all of the examples that you have here, but I'll put text like this, like the words Babel will be written on the side of the panel. Okay. And it's just a way for that artwork to kind of take on a new meaning. As you kind of, you know, you're walking through a gallery, you obviously, most people will stand in front of a painting, and putting text on the side is a way for them to kind of have another second moment of pause. And I always think of it in that context, it's like an A-B read. Like you have your first read of a painting, and then you have like this little bit of text. And that's a similar thing to the titles of my pieces. That's like just a way to convey it, you know, in another way. So yeah, text is, I mean, and also text has a big history within the pop art movement. You'll see another artist that I'll bring up for my demo. Ed Rouget has a big and long-standing history of using text within his work. So yeah, I mean, a lot of this is, again, reacting to what other artists are doing, living my life, and then kind of, you know, every painting is a new way for that to kind of play out in a different kind of way.
Great. And I want to remind everyone too, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, you can leave a comment or a question. Shirley just commented, truly appreciate the artist's use of color, which I think is a nice comment. And yeah, it is, going through these slides, it's a really, you've got a really good handle on sort of a consistent palette, but also never feels anywhere near stale or repetitive. It's a really good balance and really interesting use in the way certain things pop, and your choice for shadows and choice for line work. You mentioned acrylic earlier. Do you mostly work with acrylic?
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up, and thank you for the comment. That means a lot. So yeah, I think I hate to repeat myself, but a lot of this stuff is like the same lens, but for everything you do. So like design, color, it's all about limiting yourself and finding the things that really interest you. And for me, I just really gravitate towards certain colors. This piece is a perfect example. And I gravitate towards those colors because they allow me to tell the stories that I like to tell. They allow me to paint the sunsets that I like to paint. Even the way that these buildings are modeled and the form is kind of described can only be told with these colors in the way that I want to tell them. So a lot of that goes into like really with every body of work, I kind of am like limiting myself in the colors that I use. And so I just got my mail today, and I just finally got like the perfect pink paint. Like I've bought probably 20 different brands of pink paint over 6 years of painting, but like this is the one. Like this is the one that like gets lighter and darker, but it always, and it's the same thing for green and blue. And you just want to find like these colors and exist within the spectrum of color in a way that feels really comfortable and personal. So yeah, color's really, really personal to me. Nice.
I'm excited to keep an eye out for this perfect pink in your work coming up.
Oh, it's a big step for me now that I have this pink.
That's great. We talked a bit about, you mentioned shows in Hamtramck, shows in Australia. I think you mentioned earlier that this one was actually a commission piece. You mentioned working with collectors. Do you have any, and this is probably something that we could talk about for a lot more than the remaining 27 minutes, but do you have any brief advice for artists that want to break into the business?
Yeah. This is like a 3-hour talk. Yeah, but I'd say like the business being like making art and like funding that capability for yourself is like just this big like all expansive discussion. For me, like I've found some success with working with galleries, collectors, publishing companies, to kind of sell my work. And a lot of that just comes from like being just in front of people and being very, I guess in a way confident in, but also like you can say confidence, but then there's also confidence, but a confidence that also leaves you receptive to criticism. And so like the opportunity in Australia came from an artist or a collector of mine bought a few paintings, and we just got in contact through Instagram. And he was a really great collector, really like appreciated my work and really had a good perspective on it. And so I just kept in contact with him, and I sent him another opening that I did just to kind of get his perspective on it and to see what he liked and didn't like. And so he was like, oh, well, let me get you in contact with my gallery in Australia. And that is how that relationship kind of started. Social media is a big one, always like posting to Instagram, kind of is like a really big thing to consider. But I think just being present and being known, I think if people aren't seeing your work and consistently kind of interacting with it, and I guess finding a way to very softly kind of like tell people about your work. You don't want to walk around the streets with, your printed out portfolio and just tell everyone about it. That's a little bit too extreme. But you also don't want to like make a painting and lock it up in your basement. So there's like a middle ground there of, you know, I always like look at it as like a new body of work is an opportunity for me to get more criticism of my work, response to what people are liking and what people are seeing and what people are resonating to. If I put a painting on the wall or 3 paintings on the wall and people can react in some way, and like seeing what they pick up on, that's a way for me to kind of test what I'm doing and to kind of react in some way. And so just always being open to criticism, I think would be the open to input and to kind of like just letting people see your work.
That's great.
And I could expand upon that forever, and I'm sorry if that doesn't cover everything, but that's a really, really meaty thing to ask. And
for sure. And I like too how you're kind of talking about, you know, the business side of things, but also kind of what you've been saying this whole time, and also what I think you're going to continue to talk about when we get to the demo portion is, you know, part of, you know, breaking through or, you know, breaking into it is just doing the work and just always being open, always trying new things, always, you know, taking challenges head on, always, you know, doing the work, which kind of leads to the other things and the other opportunities.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I think that's a massive part of it is doing the work and like making space for it within your life. And we were kind of talking about this before the artist talk, is like everyone has to find space within their life to make the art that they want to make. When I started off, that meant working, you know, 5 days a week, and then, you know, going from work to my studio and making a body of work, or like having a full-time job. And then slowly like these paintings like started to find homes and started to find people who were interested in them. And this work, I guess all to say is like, you have to be making this work with the enthusiasm of someone who's making millions of dollars off of it.
Sure.
Because that possibility is so flexible and so amorphous, and it can kind of come about in so many different ways. And then also like we'll kind of get into this right about now is like the mural side of it. And that's a whole different industry, because that is, we talked a lot about my gallery work, but murals is this whole separate thing, because you're making work for the public in a public space. And you're most importantly, this is recent murals of mine that I did for Murals in the Market. And again, there's a very different aesthetic to this, and a very different, but there's like a through line to my gallery work. And my first thing that I think about when I make a mural is that responsibility side of it. Because you're not just trying to get paid. You're not just, you know, creating this big piece of artwork. You're kind of inserting something into someone's day-to-day life. And hopefully for the better, you know, hopefully it speaks to them.
That's kind of like the flip side to, you know, you talked about going back to the piece looking from the floor through the door, like, you know, a lot of your work seems to be about taking in the environment, whether it's what's out your window or what's on your table or a house you're walking by, but how that stuff is affecting you. So it's nice to see that you're aware of, you know, if I'm putting something out into the world, whether it's on a wall in a gallery or whether it's on a wall outdoors, that's going to be having the same effect on someone else. And taking that, that's a good way to look at taking that responsibility seriously, that this is going to be, you know, something people see.
Yeah. And like, I mean, the responsibility, again, another massive topic. Responsibility means so many things. And I think how I tackle that responsibility is with the gallery work. So that when I do a mural, like for the PIPA program that we'll talk about, or for Murals in the Market, I'm not just, you know, showing up on the weekend and putting a mural on the wall. I've been doing this in my studio on a smaller scale and been thinking about these things. And so when a city like Berkeley and an organization like the DIA contacts me to make a mural like this at a massive scale that, you know, thousands of people will see, the confidence to do that comes from not only other murals, but at least a little bit of like, I've read a ton of books that inform my practice. I've thought about this, I've written about it. Yeah, just like that responsibility feels like I'm doing the most for what I'm getting asked to do. Yeah. And
Yeah,
then,
I like that. And this picture up now is like you said, a mural in downtown Berkeley. That was a partnership with the DIA. And yeah, it's a little tricky with the shadows in the trees, but I recommend you, if you're in the area, go and see it. It's really cool, and it really, I think it's lovely to look at, and it also, I think ties into, the aesthetic and the vibe of downtown Berkeley and Oakland County, and it's a really nice addition to their downtown there.
yeah, thank you. And this was like like just painting outside. I mean, talking about another thing is like gallery or studio painting and mural painting being kind of things that run parallel to one another. Painting outside is this like tremendous opportunity to just like have a real time, like public reacting to every move you're making.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's like, why do you pick that color? Or other times it's like a kid and their dad walking by and like they're so happy to see it. And that's like just this other tremendous part. And like that's why going back to the process of making this piece is Berkeley wanted a piece that reflected them and reflected their community. So that's why the content matter is slightly different from what I normally focus on. I mean, there's obviously through lines and threads there, but that became priority number one. And I kind of knew that I was close, and to my standards, kind of hitting that mark when people started coming up and like saying like, thank you for this, and thank you for doing this. This is great that we have this now. And when they say like, it's great that we have this, like, this is ours, that feels like I kind of did something cool in that space.
Definitely. There was another comment here from Julia saying, I love your pieces because even with the still lifes, there's often movement or some sort of tangible energy, especially of the oranges spilling out of the bowl and the otherwise still seen.
Yeah.
Which I think was this one, which, there is energy there, and it is a still, but also you can almost like picture like the neon lights in the background flickering, or
I always think of it as like this is a scene that there are people right outside of the frame, and cropping them like right to the left and right to the right is like maybe your friend drawing in his notebook and your other friend drinking a beer, and they're there and you don't feel alone, and there's motion and there's people interacting with this space, and so thank you for that. That means a lot.
And I guess getting in, we've only got a couple more slides, so we've got about 15 minutes. So I want to make sure we have a chance to get to the second portion. But just real quick, he said this was your first mural you ever did. This is Ernie's Market in Oak Park, I think. If you could talk a little bit about how that came about, speaking of, breaking into the mural business.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought this up, because this was first mural I ever did. To get my first mural, I literally just went to, I think it was like 5 or 6 restaurants and like stores, and I like sat down, had a meal, like ate there, bought something, interacted with the store, and it was a store that I wanted to go to anyways. And I just was like, can I talk to the owner? Normally if they're there, they'll come talk to you. And most of them said no, because they're like, who are you? But Ernie's was like, of course, like let's get you money for paint. And like the next week I was out there painting. I think I had to get it like approved by the city, but this is another one. Like Ernie is a hometown hero for Oak Park. He's a beloved person and a really good guy. And I wanted to have him in the center of this, and kind of just his like really beautiful, in a very personal. If anyone hasn't been to Ernie's Market in Oak Park, it's a trip. It's really like a crazy experience. Like great food. It feels like a time capsule.
Yeah,
like
totally.
And I wanted to get all of that character in here. And yeah, people seem to react in a way of like, oh, I know, like that's where the Better Made is, and that's where the pickles are. And stuff like
Yeah.
that. And again, this is like kind of earlier on in my career, but yeah, you can kind of still see those. Like this is like the first piece where my work started looking like mine, and not like other people's.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm sure that, some of that probably came naturally or had to come when, when you spoke about that confidence, you're no longer just doing something for a critique or something in your sketchbook. You're doing something out on a wall of this business, this place you care so much about. So it kind of seems like that would naturally kind of push you over the ledge to, develop a little bit.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when I made this piece, my gallery painting work looked so different from this. And I made this piece, and then I was like, oh, I'm kind of like frustrated because my work looks nothing like this. And then I started making work that, like in my gallery work, now full circle has come to this point. So yeah, like it's weird because sometimes you'll get this prompt, or you'll make work for someone or for like a collector. Like a slide previous to this was work for a collector who just wanted to buy like, a nice size painting of mine. And they kind of gave me a few prompts, and like those subtle prompts will kind of move you in different ways. And that's kind of what it's all about over the years.
That's great. We have one last slide here of some recent work. This is for, you mentioned an opening this past weekend. These were those paintings in question, correct?
Correct. Yeah, this is for a group opening at 550 Gallery in New York that just opened this last weekend. Really excited about these. I feel like they kind of are, we kind of talk about like the through line, and like you did a really good work of threading through my work linearly. And these kind of fit aesthetically with everything else, but they are like pushing that humor component and that like not taking yourself too seriously component to its like broader limits. So I'm really excited about these because of just, again, like it's an opportunity to be a little more funny with my work and a little bit less serious. But then there's still that serious component that came from years of making very serious work. At least in my mind. So yeah, I think this was again another opportunity. Like there was a prompt for this opening, so it was an opportunity, and it just had to be work about pets and about domestic animals, and so that was an opportunity to kind of put me somewhere that felt more right than the work I was making before.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've got about 10 or 11 minutes left. So if anyone has any last comments or questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. And Michael, you're now going to, I think, open up Photoshop and show us a little bit of your the early side of your process.
Yeah. Okay. So I have this up right now. This is not a painting of mine. This is a painting of mine that we saw earlier in the hour. It is a painting entitled Mirage that I did for a group opening or trio opening at Playground Detroit that was entitled Depth of Field. And that opening was all about just like spaces and open space and closed spaces. And this was a kind of an opportunity to kind of compress space and explore content, or I guess a motif and a subject matter that I've talked about and used throughout my work, being pools. So yeah, these are a couple pieces. This is an Ed Ruchet piece, pool number 9. This is a David Hockney piece, very, very famous piece of his. 2 pieces that I have just seen in museums or online in some way, and 2 artists that I really love, and I like what I've read about them. And that's an interesting thing that when we talk about art, you kind of see something and then you start to investigate it by reading more about that artist. And then through that reading and seeing those paintings, I started to take photographs. Really, I'm not the best photographer, and these are just taken with my phone. But this is a photo I took when I visited Miami in 2019. This is a photo that I took probably when I was like 17 or 18. Super old painting or super old photo. And then this is a drawing that I probably did right before I did this painting here. So again, you just look at art and you kind of take all this all in, and then it kind of has this like ripple effects, kind of like a pool, where it starts to affect what you focus on and what you observe in your day-to-day life. And that's kind of why when I said like you want to make art like it's adding something to your life. And for me, like art is something that if I weren't making it a career, it would be something I would do daily just because it makes me more observant of my surroundings, and helps me, just grounds me in the moment. When I'm sitting by this pool, when I was sitting by this pool, it reminds me of these feelings that I've had of relaxing, and like just taking time of pause, and it kind of like threads all these experiences into kind of one singular experience that you can kind of start to conceptualize for yourself. And so I kind of over the years, and this is that same painting hanging in the gallery. I said it was 4 feet by 4 feet. So yeah, I took in all those experiences, and I wanted to make a 4 foot by 4 foot acrylic painting for the opening. And this is kind of that process of doing so. This is it in process. That's super zoomed. Let's see if I can zoom out. Okay, cool. This is another in process photo, where you can kind of see the tape that I'm, again, kind of holding onto the silhouette of every single object and painting that crisp silhouette over and over and over again. And I'm doing that again on acrylic, with acrylic paint on wood panel. Wood panel, again, lets me get that really crisp edge. And you can kind of see the color wheel up here, and I'll kind of talk about that as I kind of progress. So before I do the painting, I normally will do, and this is not the painting, this is a Photoshop file. Photoshop is a software that designers and illustrators and painters use, basically to edit photos. And in this context, I'm using it to plan out my painting step by step. You kind of see here, this is me using a few filters to kind of distort and to kind of give it this liveliness, and kind of breaking up the straight lines. So again, the reason I'm doing this in Photoshop is that there's like just so many editing tools that you can use to kind of develop a scene. And a lot of this starts with sourcing these drawings here. You can kind of see this seat here is kind of like, I'm keeping that in mind when I'm rendering that out and drawing that in there. And again, this is the Photoshop file that I'll basically project onto the board, and then I'll draw that on with pencil, and then I'll mask out every tree and wall, and I'll paint that in with acrylic paint. And so this is kind of basically my simplified process of how I go about designing everything out. And I'm kind of peeling away the layers here. And this is kind of what I'm seeing in reverse real time as I'm working on something. As you can kind of see, like you start to kind of develop the color and the silhouettes, kind of like, like you add doors to a wall. And I think about it as you're going from this really broad idea of the pool, and a backyard pool. And you're basically adding clarity pass after pass after pass. And most importantly, you're kind of going to this end goal of trying to be as clear as possible, and as specific as possible, even down to like the fact that someone would, hang out their clothes to dry, and put out their towel, and they might have a tire in their backyard because they just haven't gotten rid of it yet. And so as you can kind of see, those specific details, this is all in reverse, are what gets added later. And even down to the fact that I'm working in black and white first is helpful for me, because that helps me kind of work in silhouette very early on, and working from just again, you can almost think of it as wiping. I think of making a painting as wiping off the grease of a camera lens, and you're just getting more and more specific until you kind of end up with something that feels very personal and like the scene that you kind of set out to kind of illustrate or to kind of paint. So you kind of have this here, and I'll wrap this up. This is the first 15 minutes of a painting for me, is just kind of, I open up Photoshop on my computer, and I kind of start to mask out okay, there's going to be a ground plane here, a little bit of pattern, and then a dark mid-ground, and then a really light background with some trees. And then I'll kind of go back up, kind of start to add some haze and thinking about the lighting effects, maybe killing some of the darker tones, adding some of those specifics, and then to all the way back to what you see here. And then even to what we see here, and more so here, what ended up hanging on the wall in the gallery, is this painting that feels very personal. But again, it's really informed by all of these memories, all of these photos, all of these drawings that this painting probably took me 120 hours to paint. But I mean, like I said, I started thinking about that with this photo that I took when I was 16. So it's kind of an idea that, develops over a really long time. But this photo in and of itself wasn't enough for me to kind of come to the conclusion of making this painting. I had to see all these other paintings, see some taken photography. Sometimes sitting and drawing with a subject gives you more time of pause to kind of focus and contemplate on it. And yeah, that's my process overall. Again, really abbreviated, but I think that kind of gives you a good idea of everything. Zach, you're muted.
That's great. I like that you tied it back to, that photo when you were 17, like that David Hockney painting is a great example where that's a pretty, at first glance, a pretty simple, for lack of a better or more nuanced term. But, however long it took him, it also took him thousands and thousands of hours to get to that point of, getting to that style. Yeah. So it's nice to, consider it's not just the physical amount of time you're touching a brush, but your whole lived experience up to that can lead to these works.
And that's the cool part for me is that's I can go get groceries and that's part of the process. And that's what's enjoyable.
Yeah. And then thinking about how that could go on to have a ripple effect. I remember seeing that one Murals in the Market piece on Gratiot years ago. And then now here we are. Yes. Well, thank you, Michael. This was a great talk. Really informative, really interesting. Really enjoyed spending, kind of a deeper dive, no pool pun intended, looking at your work. Sue asked, what is Michael's website address again? And I think we can throw up your Instagram. And also you're pretty Googleable. I feel like you've got a website and some other info online, but this is where you're most up to date and has links to everything, current exhibitions, upcoming shows, lots of work. A lot we didn't even get to talk about, but this was a great chat. Thank you so much, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. This is great.
All right. And I just wanted to say thanks to Ian for introducing us and to Amanda for helping out behind the scenes. And also I wanted to thank Ani, who is our community arts coordinator, who introduced me to Michael when they were working on that Berkeley mural project together. And we will be back next week with a program called What's for Dinner? Decorative Arts in the DIA Collection Part 2. with hosts Cindy Patrick, Jim O'Malley, and Ray Henney. If you didn't see part 1, you could probably still join. Thank you. Have a great rest of your week.
Should I-